And, everyone
Okay.
says, pick a niche, write only about that. First of all, you don't even know if it's the right niche. So that could be a huge mistake, and you could be wasting so much time going down a path that isn't yours. Trying to develop these topics, you're going to sort of figure out what people want. And this is how your niche finds you instead of you find your own niche.
Hi, this is Shubham Tiwari. I'm the community manager of the Thousand Faces Club, and I welcome you to the Fireside Chats, where we bring to you your favorite creators and we try to open up their playbooks and try to understand their processes. Please enjoy this episode. Our today's guest is an automation data as well as operations nerd who is one of the fastest growing voices on growth marketing. He's the host of Growth Talks podcast, as well as currently leading growth at Contrast. Maxim Poulsen, welcome to the Thousand Faces Club.
Hi, Shubham. Thanks for having me. It means a lot.
So, to decode your introduction a bit, please help us understand more about yourself and the role you play at Contrast.
Yeah, of course. So maybe just to give just a little bit of background, just so all of this makes sense. I studied engineering at school. In France, we have these very generalistic engineering schools where everyone goes to do consulting and management afterwards. That wasn't really for me. So after school, I decided to make my way into the startup world. Spent 2.5, 3 years, something like that, in a B2B enterprise startup. Because of the the positioning and the go-to-market strategy, it was very operations, automation, data centered, where was a lot of support work basically for the salespeople, for the customer success team, for the strategy, for the leadership. And then at the beginning of this year, I switched to a new company called Contrast. Right. So to keep it very brief, I'm not here to pitch Contrast or anything, but we're trying to build an equivalent of, let's say, Canva for video. The same way Canva sort of democratized design, letting anyone, without any design skills design. Well, we're trying to build the same for video. And so my role in Contrast, I was the first non-tech, non-product hire. And so I was sort of brought in to determine growth foundations, right, an initial go-to-market strategy, and then try to look into scaling this. But this will come, I guess, a bit later. I think something that's interesting to note is we do consider ourselves to be a PLG company, so a product-led growth company. I don't know if you want me to maybe develop on this idea or not.
Yeah, I mean, PLG is the buzzword nowadays, right?
PLG is quite the buzzword. Yeah. I think there's the PLG in the sort of buzzword sense where it's like, okay, I have a free trial on my website. Maybe people don't have to book a demo to see the product. I think that's what many people imagine as PLG today. I think to give maybe more of a holistic definition, I would define it as a company-wide strategy that puts the product as the center focus rather than necessarily the go-to-market strategy. And therefore, the idea would be to extract or extrapolate a go-to-market strategy from the product and right, not vice versa. So it's quite a new strategy in certain senses, especially for B2B. It's pretty, let's say, familiar or classic for more B2C or DTC, direct-to-consumer companies. But for B2B and especially SaaS, it's a relatively new movement. So that's why the word is buzzing quite a lot at the moment. So
Maxim, we are more interested in your journey as a creator on LinkedIn. You have close to 10,000 followers now, and you have, I've seen you grow on LinkedIn, and it's quite impressive. So please tell us about your growth playbook.
I think that maybe to preface anything about strategy or growth necessarily, I think one of the big misconceptions, and I actually even before starting this, I will be releasing a series of posts and a huge Notion doc on everything that I've learned over the past 6 months. Right. So I'll probably be releasing that over the next few weeks. I'm still finalizing it. So, if people want to go follow me and be there for that release, I'd be super happy to share it for free, obviously. But I would just like to start by saying one of the biggest misconceptions is that you have to be necessarily an expert in a domain to start posting and to start building a community. That I think is a misconception because when experts speak, they tend to speak at a very high level and they don't necessarily give the explanations necessary to really comprehend the core concepts. And I think that actually by being not an expert, but by being passionate and by being interested in certain topics, you can very, very well, find your place as a creator in a given community there's this idea of building in public, which is, building a company or a startup, something like that in public and sharing all this information. I consider what I'm doing to be learning in public. And I read a lot of other creators. I read a lot of newsletters. I read a lot of blog articles. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I try to speak to a lot of people. And then what I do is, as I learn new things and as these things sort of make sense to me, then I start to write about them. And writing about them allows me to sort of formalize them and to take maybe abstract concepts that I might have heard of left and right, and really put them into something that's a bit more organized. And this is my way of learning. I think that it's writing by learning. That's maybe just for the sort of like the introduction. And then I think when it comes to the growth playbook, like if someone is looking to grow on LinkedIn, what I would recommend for them is, so I wrote down sort of 4 key topics. The first one is consistency. And this is just because once you get into the habit of posting every day, you're going to hate yourself the day you won't post. And I use this every day, and I've been posting for, I think, 160 something days in a row. And if I were to not post tomorrow, it would break my heart. Because I'm like, I've been doing this for so long. Why would I break that streak? So I think that's a great way to sort of get into it, is just start posting. Even if it's bad, it doesn't matter. This is another thing. Like if it's bad, no one's going to see it. It's going to have no reach. And so no one will remember it. So you never have to worry about posting bad content, because if it's bad, no one's going to read it and no one's going to remember it anyway. So the first part is consistency. And this sort of breaks down into, at least to start, quantity over quality. Just to really start like dishing out content, and then taking those learnings from that quality and extracting what your definition of quality would be. And then you use that as sort of a driving factor to generate better content.
Right.
So then first one is consistency. Second one is variety. I think there's a balance to find between always talking about the same topics and talking about different topics. And so the way I sort of organize my content is I have, in growth, we have we have the notion of a funnel, and there's the notion of tofu, mofu, bofu, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. And this is exactly how I've organized my content strategy. Top of funnel content has a broader potential audience. It's a lot easier to write. It's usually fun. It's where I'm going to be posting, marketing examples. I'm going to be posting memes. I'm going to be posting stories about things I find interesting. And those posts are not very related to what I do, but gather larger audiences. And these are my bigger posts that end up doing, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 views, and that bring new followers. Then I have sort of middle of funnel posts, which are going to be more growth related. So top of funnel is more marketing, middle of funnel is more growth. This is when I'm going to be talking about frameworks. I'm going to be talking about strategies. I'm going to be talking about, things I've learned. I'm going to be talking about how growth can be tentacular and work with other teams in the company.
Right.
And the goal of middle of funnel is to build trust, is to show that you're developing an expertise, and to really sort of establish this trusting relationship towards your audience. And the third one is bottom of funnel content, and this is going to be more centered towards the conversion. This is when I'm going to be sharing, for example, posts about contrast, when I'm going to be sharing, new releases, big updates, videos we've created, or when I'm going to be sharing podcast episodes. And I ask people, go in the comments, click the link, go check out the episode. If you only share the bottom of funnel content, people have no reason to trust you. And if people have reason to trust you, but there's no one trusting you, then there's no point and no one's going to be watching. So you really have to have like a coverage across these three to make it work. And this is something that I've been talking with a lot of creators about, and that they've been doing either implicitly or explicitly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the last one is to just write about stuff you like, because if writing is a chore, then you're never going to learn to love it. And I think it's sort of, the goal is to find what you love writing about and find a way to love writing. And if you can find both, then your content strategy basically writes itself. And finding how to love writing is more of a personal. It's going to be different to everyone. It's going to be, how do you, when do you write? How do you write? Do you write on your computer? Do you write on your phone? When do you write and when do you edit? Do you do this to the same time? Do you publish do you schedule content months in advance or days in advance, or do you write everything in real time? And this has to be sort of personal experimentation, and no one can tell you how to write. But by experimenting, different topics, and by experimenting between this top of funnel, middle of funnel, and bottom of funnel content, you're going to find out, one, what your audience is resonating with, and two, what you like writing about. And sometimes those things won't line up, and you might have to sacrifice certain things. I used to write a lot about productivity.
Yeah.
People didn't seem very interested in it, and so I sort of moved away from it. I still do a post on productivity from time to time, but I accept the fact that I'm not a productivity content creator, and that's fine.
So it's really amazing that you spoke about finding that rhythm and writing as something that you're passionate about. So my next question, which comes naturally to this conversation now, is like, have you found your content market fit as a creator? Do you think you have found your voice?
I think so. I mean, it's never black or white. It's sort of like to give an analogy with startups. It's like product market fit. It's never really black or white. You never really have product market fit. You're going in the right direction. At some point, you think you probably have it, and then usually what happens is, and this is exactly the same for startups and for creators, they usually go past a certain point and they sort of explode. Like, it takes you a year or 2 years to get to 10,000, and then it takes you 2 months to get to 20,000, or 3 months.
Yeah.
I think I'm starting to find it in the sense that people today are, reaching out, thanking me for the content. I actually did a poll yesterday, and I was asking, how often do you see my posts? And I think it was 40 or 50% of responders said every single day. And, that means that there is a sort of a community of people that are reading my posts every day. Part of me likes to think that if I were to stop posting for a week, people would be like, "Oh, where's Max?" I don't know if that's
Maxim?
the case. Yeah, exactly. Maybe if one day I take a break, I get some of those. But then I do think the first, where I would say yes, is that I think I am, in a sense, starting to build some kind of an audience. Is that audience a community yet? I'm not exactly sure, but at least a regular audience. And I'm also starting to find topics that I like writing about and that I like rewriting about. I think that's also another important part of content, is when topics work, you have to sort of drill them down, and then you also have to recycle them and repeat them, because, I'm putting out a post today. 2 months ago was 60 posts ago. You're not going to remember what I wrote 60 posts ago. And there are some posts that I've done that are nearly exactly the same, very few differences. I do them every 2 months. And that's just a free post, basically, that I get, and that people are always happy to see, like lists, stuff like that. And they're like, and I've actually had people, thank me multiple times for the same list 2 months apart, because, they forgot about it, or it reminded them of something, or so I think, when you sort of get to the point where you can start recycling your content, then you're sort of getting into the content market fit, I guess. That's it was a bit of a weird answer, but
I guess
slowly,
you took it to a macro level, as well as gave a very fine analogy on micro level as well. So it's wonderful, and it's really amazing that it's your first podcast as a guest. Please talk about your podcast, which is titled as Growth Talks. What do you speak about, and how often you produce episodes?
Yeah, of course. So first podcast as a guest. I've done a few webinars before, but podcast is my first. Okay, so to explain maybe why I created Growth Talks, I've noticed that there were a lot of growth podcasts that, exactly as I was explaining earlier. If you take the Kyle Coleman's, if you take the Kyle Poyers, if you take the Elena Vernas, it's very high level. It's very, like 400-person general growth strategy. And we're not talking about day-to-day growth. We're not talking about the people that work in growth. We're talking about growth as a concept, growth as a strategy. And I did have the feeling that, this might seem rude, but it's really not rude. But the everyday Joe, in growth wasn't really having a voice. And I think that growth is so much about execution. There's a big part of strategy, but it's so much about executing well and I know so many brilliant people that work in growth and that, make so much money, that bring so much growth to their companies, but that aren't at that super high level where they're considered thought leaders. And I wanted to sort of give them a voice and be able to give them a platform to tell their story and talk about what they do. And so that's sort of the why. It's a weekly podcast. I release an episode a week. on our Contrast platform, but also on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. And basically, yeah, I just interview someone every week. We talk about who they are, what they do,
Right.
a growth topic they love, a challenge they faced. And the goal is, yeah, really to give, either people who work in growth, students who might, want to work in growth, or people who work in, sales, marketing, product, who might want to make their way into growth, to sort of discover people who work in growth. What do they do? What does their day-to-day look like? What kind of topics are they working on? To sort of find people that are experts in topics to be able to reach out and ask them questions. And then we also try to, as reasonably as possible, make everything actionable, try to tie it into reality. And so this is why I also ask for resources, for examples, for challenges, so they can also inspire. And I think a big part of growth is also finding inspiration. And the wider variety of content you can produce on growth, the more potential inspiration you are dishing out, basically. And this is why I cover topics from paid acquisition. Monday we're releasing a topic on customer marketing. We did high intent outbound. We did event strategies. We did we cover basically anything, and all of this is growth. And I sort of want to put an umbrella over growth and show that it is all the same thing, and that we have a lot to learn from each other.
And I really like the line that you just mentioned, like growth is so much more about execution. A lot of creators and people tend to go into a lot of, they shy away from execution at some point in time in their journey. So talking more about conversations, a few months ago you wrote about a conversation that you had with another growth expert, Maxim, if I'm taking the name correctly.
Absolutely. Maxence de Villepion, he was an early growth at Spendesk. So Spendesk is a French unicorn. He got there pretty early. They scaled the whole growth team. Maxence is a good friend of mine.
Yeah. So you wrote a wonderful post about that conversation, but you sort of left that something intriguing for us at the end of it. You mentioned that Maxence mentioned triangulation tactics for growth, which got you really excited. So can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so maybe just to give quickly a bit of context, this conversation with Maxence was one of the main reasons that pushed me to launch the podcast, because we had been chatting about a bunch of growth strategies, and he mentioned his triangulation tactic. And I was like, this is so cool. I wish we had recorded it, and I wish we could share it to people, because people would be really interested in learning about this. And to make it very brief, I won't pretend to own this tactic, but what Maxence calls triangulation is basically the idea that if you're selling software to a sizable company, you're going to tend to have multiple stakeholders. And multiple stakeholders means you're going to have the end users, you're going to have the managers, you're going to have the buying committee, you're going to have, all operations, maybe tech for integrations. And the underlying principle of triangulation is all of these people basically have different jobs to be done, have different incentives. And if you're only targeting them one by one, then you lose a lot of time, because if you target the end user, then the end user has to introduce you to the manager. Then you have to speak to the manager. Then you have to convince the manager. Then the manager introduces you to the buying committee. Then you have to convince the buying committee. And it's sort of, you have to leap like this, from stakeholder to stakeholder. And his strategy of triangulation was, what if we could contact everyone at the same time? And if we can get, 3 out of 4 people to sort of be interested in our products simultaneously, then buying like the sales cycle goes down from a few weeks to possibly a few days, because it's like that Spider-Man meme where they're like looking at each other and they're like all the same, they all agree. They all agree, they all like the product, they all understand what it's going to bring them. And it just, it's one of those, it might seem very basic, but I've seen so few companies actually implement a successful triangulation or similar technique.
Got it.
So yeah, it's just a specific way of doing a branch of go-to-market, I guess. Nothing too magical, but it's cool. I like it.
Yeah. So Maxim, you also speak about positioning a lot. And since predominantly our audience consists of creators, and most of them are solo creators who are, at the very beginning of the journeys. So what would be your top advice to an early solo creator on positioning? Because many of them don't even know the concept of positioning, and later on they can rue the fact that nobody told them, or They discover something altogether, something else.
So maybe my first question would be, when you say positioning, what kind of positioning do you mean? And to me, there are sort of, if you're a solo creator, you have two types of positioning. You have content positioning and you have revenue positioning. The first one is, what kind of basically content you produce.
I think
second
content,
is, how do you monetize that? So in
yeah,
terms
both.
of content.
Both aspects are very important, because monetizing is ultimately the goal of every creator. So can you talk about both of them? Yeah.
So in terms of content, there's you probably know Luke Matthews, who's a very big LinkedIn creator, like 70,000 something like that followers, and he wrote a very interesting piece on how we recommend to early stage creators to niche down, and he wrote a whole piece on why he thinks that's wrong, but he's actually recommending to not niche down. And everyone says, pick a niche, write only about that, and then specialize.
A lot of jargon about that.
Yeah, and we hear a lot about that. And his argument was basically, first of all, you don't even know if it's the right niche. So that could be a huge mistake, and you could be wasting so much time going down a path that isn't yours. And so his advice was sort of, as I was mentioning earlier, that you still have to have this, top of funnel, middle of funnel content that is more broad, that allows you to sort of, and in the same way that in growth we do experiments. And how do we do experiments? We submit a hypothesis, we measure the outcome, and then we determine if it was successful or not. And it's the same way with content creators. So you might choose a specific topic. I want to write about landing page conversion. How do you create landing pages to convert? But maybe you'll want to choose analogous topics like buyer psychology, or how does the brain approach specific numbers, or how does the brain read information or take in information. And by trying to develop these topics, you're going to sort of figure out what people want, and this is how your niche finds you instead of you find your own niche. And I think that's a
wonderful way of putting it. Yeah,
but it's sort of what it is, and it's actually, I would not even put it like that. I would say it's your audience finds your niche rather than you find your niche in your audience, because as you're building a community and as you keep experimenting with new topics, you're going to get feedback. And this is a great part of being a creator, is that your time to feedback is very short. You usually get feedback on a post or on a newsletter or on a blog article in days, weeks at most, and you can continuously experiment on new topics. And while doubling down on what works, it also gives you a bit of leeway to figure out what could work. And I think that this is sort of how you build an anti-fragile content strategy. And then when it comes to revenue, I think this is I don't know how I'm going to answer this without contradicting what I just said, but I think that first comes, if you're a solo creator looking to monetize an audience, I think the audience comes first and the product comes next. You never know what the audience is going to want before you actually hear it from them. And I think trying to build a product for an audience, trying to build an audience for a product is harder than trying to build a product for an audience. And, you might actually figure out that, then also it depends, do you want to work for something you love, or do you want to work for something that brings you the most money, because if you start posting on LinkedIn, you're extremely successful, you're raking in 1,500 followers a month, then obviously you can sell a LinkedIn playbook, and that will work. Is that what you want to talk about? That's another decision. That's very personal. I decided to stop posting about LinkedIn growth because those posts work disproportionately well, because we're speaking about LinkedIn on LinkedIn. And I don't want to be known for that. It was one of my side topics, but it's not one that I chose to double down on. Some people might want to, some people might not want to, and that's a personal decision. So I think it's you have to find the right balance between what the audience is receptive to and what you feel comfortable doing and producing. And that actually goes both for content and for revenue.
And experimentation is a very big part of it, as you just said. And let's take it up further. You're also pretty big on growth experiments. What are some of the basic tests one can run to assess growth? I mean, of course, analytics is all there. You can see yourself growing in terms of numbers, but I mean the true impact of your, let's say, content. How do you assess that?
So there's analytics. And then I think that LinkedIn today, or most platforms, don't give you enough to be able to assess the pertinence of what you're producing and what you're actually getting back. And so I think a big part of, and especially if you're making this, a business, then you have to sort of externalize some of these data points. How many inbound leads am I getting? What are the percentage of conversion rates? And then, so I would say, like, really, just maybe to give a very like high level answer, and then we can talk about this a bit more, is the more data you can gather on basically everything or anything, the more you're going to be able to experiment. And so to give and then experimentation is usually forward looking, but an analysis is usually backwards looking, and it's also finding a right balance for both, right? And it's, maybe you're going to be, what you could do, for example, is you could say, okay, for every inbound lead that I get, I ask them, what post they last read that triggered the message sent. And maybe you'll figure out that, 85% of my leads come from when I talk about LinkedIn growth. And maybe, 15% come from talking about landing pages. But then you might figure out that actually of the 85% that come from LinkedIn posts, very few actually convert into customers. And then people who come after the landing pages post, they convert a lot better and actually generate more revenue. And so there's a huge like backwards analysis part where the more you can gather and the more you can sort of create a system to understand what's working and what isn't. And then experimentation in the future, there's a bunch of ways to experiment. You can change your posting schedule. You can change your ratio of top of funnel to middle of funnel to bottom of funnel. You can try to go from posting one time a day to 2 times a day. You can try to, skip posting for a week and only write and then come back with a more frequent schedule. All of these, like the whole principle of an experimentation is you have a hypothesis and you're trying to validate it. So that hypothesis can be anything. And there are no stupid, okay, you could have a stupid hypothesis, but, as long as you're trying to be reasonable and you're looking for your own growth, there's no reason that that your ideas would be stupid in any way. And you just have to try it. And if you don't try it, then how can you know if it works or not? And the more data you gather, the better you'll be able to assess the effectiveness or not of experimentation X, Y, or Z.
Right. And since, we are speaking today about productivity as well, and we have received this question from our multiple, audience members as well, for a content creator who's looking to build his or her brand on a particular platform, like you are on LinkedIn, somebody might be, with their video content on YouTube, how should they define, productivity for them? I mean, in terms of systems, because you said they can change, time, schedule, they can, experiment a lot. But at the end of the day, what defines productivity for a creator?
I would say that for a creator specifically, productivity is what allows you to be both efficient and consistent. Because if productivity only allows you to be efficient, but it doesn't give you the system in which to show up every day, then you're going to have obviously lower growth. And the same way, if it allows you to be consistent, but it takes you too much time, then you're not being productive. Like that's pretty much the literal definition of productivity, right? And so I really believe that productivity lies in systems. I actually wrote, I was very sad. This post did not take off, but I thought it was really interesting. And I wrote a post explaining how having systems does not make you less free. But on the contrary, the more systems you have, the more freedom you have. And this comes, and I was reading at the time, Atomic Habits by James Clear that I would recommend to absolutely anyone.
It's a good book,
brilliant book. It's a great book. And it's this idea of if you have a system where every morning at 8 a.m. you write for 30 minutes, then you don't spend time thinking about when am I going to write, but you spend time thinking about what am I going to write about. And so the freedom you lose in the time slot being blocked in your calendar is freedom you gain in creative freedom. And this goes for a lot of things. I try to go to the gym every day, and the fact that I go to the gym every day, or at least try to, means that I don't have to think about, what am I going to do today? I have a schedule. And so when I get there, I'm not like, what am I going to do? I'm going to do a push, pull, legs. It's, and it gives me, and it's actually liberating to know what I'm going to do. And so I would really, insist on this idea of systems. And so there are systems for writing, there are systems for organizing, there are systems for connecting and for building an audience. And all of this has to be, it has to be what works for you. Just maybe give a very few examples. I tend to write Sunday evenings. I tend to write in the evening. I tend to be most prolific in the evenings when I have the most ideas. I have a few systems to be able to write down ideas of posts that I have. So I have Notion on my phone, but I also send myself Slack messages and WhatsApp messages if I just have an idea. Right. I also use Twitter as an idea as a place to store ideas. I just tweet random things, and then I
Yeah.
go back on LinkedIn and look at my past tweets, and I was like, oh, could this be a post? And then this sort of then transfers to the organization. And so I have a huge Notion document where I have, hundreds of post ideas. So I have 4 columns, 5 columns. I have idea, draft, 4 columns, idea, draft, scheduled, posted. And so this is another very big tip that I would give to anyone who's creating content is do not delete any of your content. I consider that, when you're writing a post,
Right.
don't consider that you're writing one post. Consider that you're creating content and that at the end it will make a post, because whatever sentence does not make it into the post you're currently writing, if you delete it, it's lost. But you can easily take that sentence and move it somewhere else, turn it into another post, or it could be the spark of inspiration for another post. And so that would be another tip. And so systems for writing, systems for organizing, and then systems for engaging. For me, it's in the morning and just after lunch, log into LinkedIn, comment on other people's posts, leave a few likes, engage with my audience. And it's the sum of all of these systems that it's all of the productivity is in the creation of these systems. And then the execution is just, when I can outsource all of my productivity to my systems. I don't need to be productive anymore because my systems are productive for me. And that's sort of the way I see it today. And then it's just a question of, then I also like to be very disciplined and follow rules. So that works for me. Yeah. Maybe it doesn't work for others, but that's at least what I would recommend. I mean,
listening to you and, I'm sure our audience members are also thinking like your systems, the way you're talking about your systems, this calls for a masterclass because, there is another series that we do where, we bring in creators and they give us an overview of their systems and all. So I'm sure this can be expanded into a masterclass. So yeah. And Maxim, Twitter is in the news. We all know that for, various reasons. And, the changes are coming, right? Like Twitter is going to be very different, let's say in a matter of few months, because Elon Musk is now there. So Web3 is also there.
I'm not I don't think Twitter is going to change that much. I think there's a huge hype around Twitter, and I think there's a bigger incentive to make people believe that Twitter is going to change than there is an actual incentive to change Twitter, which means that the idea of Twitter changing is making more noise than the changes themselves. I actually think Twitter is going to become maybe a better and a more balanced.
More balanced,
social media. Yeah, that would be my.
I hope so.
My expectations.
Yeah, and what I was saying, like this was my premise to build a opening for Web3 because the world is going to be really different looking. So, what is your outlook on Web3 as a content creator? What excites you the most about it? So
I'm a huge Web3 noob. I know very little about Web3. I believe in the concepts of cryptocurrency as an abstract idea.
Right.
Not that it's something that I follow, day to day or that I'm extremely interested in. However, one of the big caveats that I have with Web3 is that Web3 is supposed to be decentralized. However, it is governed by a minority of big players. And I am under the impression that Web3 today is rather a Web 2.5. In the sense that we still have, in a sort of sense, governing bodies, even if those governing bodies aren't necessarily governments. But we do have, all of these very big, very imposing crypto communities, cryptocurrencies that sort of have control over part of the market. And I don't believe that we're, at least in my opinion, that is a very ignorant opinion. I don't believe that we're very close to a truly decentralized system. I hope that answers your question. Yeah,
there are so many, hopes attached to, Web3 and how it brings the best of people. Brings out the best in people. So Maxim Poulsen, thank you so much. This was, I guess, very insightful for our audience. Very, for me, at least it was. And thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. It was really great.
Lastly, would you like to nominate anyone for this wonderful show?
Do you have a specific topic on content creation or?
Yeah, content creation. Anybody who's making waves in content creation. Anybody who we can learn from.
If you're looking for a LinkedIn superstar, I would recommend Florian Declutz that I had on Growth Talks for episode 11.
Okay.
Or maybe Richard Makara, who's CEO of Reconfigured. He's
Right.
also writing a lot on LinkedIn, growth topics, data engineering, and he also gets a lot of video, which I find is an interesting medium. Those are the first two. I guess Leia Theron also has been hosts a podcast, has been growing pretty fast on LinkedIn. She's going to catch up
Right.
to me, I think, before 20K, which makes me a bit mad, but it's life.
Right.
So yeah, those three, if you can get any of those three on, they would be exceptional guests.
Thank you so much. And I'd certainly need, help in spelling, those names. So I'll get back to
Yeah,
you.
I will. Yeah, they're not the easiest. So yeah, I'll send them to you on LinkedIn or something like that.
Thank you once again. And cut. That's it for today's episode, guys. If you really liked it, please check out all the episodes from the Fireside Chat series here. And please subscribe to the 1000 Faces Club and press the bell icon below so that you don't miss any videos from us. Thank you.